Although this demo is from a photo, this approach and these tips I think are very suitable even for location sketching. Because I'm drawing directly in pen here, even though it's from a photo, it's very suitable just drawing directly in pen, or in pencil for that matter, on location where we're not worried about, or we don't want to be worried about, trying to erase things, and we're accepting a looser, more, if you like, vibrant drawing style. I'm using a 0.3 millimeter Copic multiliner for this. Now, one of the biggest challenges I personally find in streetscapes is the ground level area, because in most cases, this is going to be the most complex area in terms of the range of things that we're seeing and the depths of plane of overlapping objects. So in this particular case, we can see that we have, there are 5 cars in the photo. I think I only draw 4 of them, but there are 5 in the photo, and they overlap to various degrees. They overlap with the bicycles that are behind them, with the people that are behind them, with the lamppost that's behind one of them, with the buildings that are behind all of that. And there are a few other street signages as well that provide additional overlapping depths of plane. So the ground level, though, is where we have most of this concentrated. And that means it can be hard to accurately establish a sense of proportion and accuracy initially at the ground level. If we start in a place that's higher up, I find it's easier, particularly because this is often a place more just of architecture, which, being a little more geometric, I find easier to eyeball accurately and to see angles and to see proportion more easily, more accurately. If we start there, then we establish at the very start of our drawing what I think of as my reference point for the rest of it. It becomes like almost like a ruler that I can use to measure things on the horizontal alignment or vertical alignment, depending what I've already drawn. Both, often. So that also means that in terms of the tempo of the drawing, I am going slower at the start and I'm picking up pace as I go along, because the more I draw, the more accurately worked out parts I position on the paper, the easier it becomes to do more after that, because I have more reference points that I can then use more quickly. It all starts, though, with careful observation, and that's just as important, even more important, when what we're looking at is in front of us. And when we draw anything, whether it's from a photo or from life, I always say we need to focus on the three-dimensional form of what we're seeing. We need to make sure we understand how an object is moving back in space and how different objects move back in space in relation to each other. When I'm actually first drawing, it is also helpful to try and see the two-dimensional shape that there is, if you like, the outline of the form, because that can be a quicker and easier way to establish an accurate representation, as long as I'm aware that the edges and the overall effect of that shape needs to be modified to help create the sense of three-dimensional form. Now, with all the architecture on this old railway station in Berlin, I don't want to get bogged down trying to draw it all in detail. So I'm trying to suggest it. I'm trying to suggest the actual detail, and I'm also trying to suggest the three-dimensionality of that detail. If you look at those capitals on the 2 columns I've drawn on each side of that arch that I started with, then you can see what I mean. Very important, though, now as we get to ground level, which is what I'm doing now, that we don't go past what we can draw at that point where there are overlapping things. Now, if I were drawing with pencil, I could just in effect draw a car over a second car and erase the overlap parts, but that's not a luxury I have, and so therefore I need to be very conscious of depth of plane, of layering of things, and of not putting ink on parts of the paper that I'm actually going to need to be white to create a credible sense of 3 dimensions. And so now I'm using my pen to help me get some angles. And you can see that in some ways all this architectural drawing I'm doing with a pretty rough feel, but I find at the end it comes together and often can look more real than if I try to draw it all in great detail. That can often end up looking overdrawn. I'm doing some vertical hatching to represent not just the brickwork, not just the horizontal lines between the courses of bricks, but also the actual red colour, which stands out strongly against the very light colour of the stonework that's used on the corners and the edges and for the decorative features. Now, initially when I started this, I was thinking that I was going to only do hatching. But when I finished, I felt that I'd put so much line work on this that the form, the 3-dimensional shape, was getting lost in the patterning of lines. And so I then decided to try adding some sketch marker to it, adding some ink values over the top in a range of tones, a range of values. And if you're finding this interesting, please hit the like button for me. And why not hit notifications and know when I post something new. I'm just having a little break at the moment from doing new drawing demos, so I'm re-releasing some of my earlier ones either at real time or, in this case, at a much reduced speed to allow better observation of my technique and of the order in which I do things, and particularly all the little, what I think of as positioning marks. The little dots and marks and hesitant marks and maybe very lightly drawn lines at first. While a fine liner pen does not give us the flexibility, the range of darkness of lines that we get with a pencil. Now this is a terrible line. Look at this line I'm about to do there. Look at that. So out. And that's what it should have been. But at the end, you won't notice that misplaced mark. We really do get too caught up with marks that aren't quite right in the right place, not quite the right angle. But I do find it's best to always put the right line in, and then when we're looking at the drawing, the brain will go to the correct angle, to the one that is in the right place. So I think that is a helpful thing to do. Whereas if we leave the wrong line, you can see me now positioning that center point in the reference first over what's underneath it, and now I use that to guide me with where I estimate it to be here. Sometimes, if I'm not completely accurate, I need to still make an adjustment where I position it in my drawing, because I need my drawing overall to look as good as I can. And if I've got a few things not quite right, then I may need to position a certain point differently to the reference, but where that's the best compromise for what I've done. So continuing with this entranceway here into this old railway platform. Apologies for the vibration. At this point I had an old camera stand that was, a lot of it was plastic, and basically the plastic parts had weathered, rubbed away, and that had created a looseness, and my hand on the table was bumping the table, and that vibration was going up through the stand and increasing in wobble the higher it got. So I have a lovely new metal stand now, but it was a frustration at this point. So now drawing this white van, and with cars again, it's important that we work on, if we like drawing streetscapes, that we work on being able to draw credible cars, that we work at being able to draw cars that are in correct perspective for the sorts of angles that we usually see cars at in streetscapes. Mostly when we draw a streetscape, we're pretty close to ground level, and therefore the cars do look a lot like this. We're not usually looking down on them from above, and we're not usually so low down that we're looking at them directly side on. There's always a bit of an angle. We're taking in some of the roof, some of the edges. And so we need to just understand the form that the cars take as they're twisted around at different angles. And we also need to make sure we bring everything together nice and tightly. And I noticed that I'd made that roof too deep on this closest car, so I just added a bit of darkness. That will get lost when I do the insides of that car. You notice I didn't finish the car behind this one because exactly where it finishes depends on exactly where the car that's closer ends up, and I didn't know that when I was drawing that further back car. And when things overlap, as these two cars do, I often like to leave what I think of as a visual halo, a very slight gap between the lines. I try not to draw the lines so that they not just don't overlap, but don't actually even meet. And the same thing here, you see I had left space too, and now I can finish that car. Cars have not held any great interest for me, so they're not something that I'd really drawn until I began to draw streetscapes. They were not something I ever was tempted to draw as an individual subject. And when that's the case, it can be handy to spend a bit of time just concentrating on weak areas of our streetscapes. And for me, cars were one of those. And I did quite a few drawings where I just played around with taking cars out of photos and drawing them at all sorts of angles, particularly where they layered behind each other, and trying to position them so they all look like they are on the same road level. That's another thing. And also, if the cars are moving backwards, to get the scale correct, to have them get small. I did draw that car, to help them get smaller to the right degree as they move further away. If you look at those bicycles there that I've drawn, I think this is a great example of trying to find marks that capture the effect, the feel of something, even when we don't capture or rather by not trying to capture the detail of it. I think bicycles are a great example of something where if we understand how bicycles are formed well, because we ride one ourselves and maybe we service it, we know how they work, we can be tempting to draw the detail that we know is there rather than keeping the detail we draw in proportion in relation to the amount of detail we really can perceive in our reference. And while we can see the bicycles, we really can't see very much detail. There's so much overlap. Most of what we can see are the wheels and maybe some wheel spokes, but overlapping wheels, and then to some degree the seats where they sit above, or handles where they come up above the wheels. So that's the effect we're trying to capture. Now, we're trying to capture the effect of these people on the other side of that car. And the first two people I drew, okay. Then the third one, the one I'm drawing now, I drew this person too large in comparison to the other two. So I brought his legs down further, and now I'm doing a figure next to him, which I'm going to draw at the same scale, whose feet will also come down further than the two that overlap to the left. And that's going to give the effect of making them look closer to us than the other three figures that I've drawn to their left. And so that was a very easy way of adjusting for starting to draw one of them too tall out of scale with the ones I draw. I simply brought his legs down further and made it look like he was closer. So there are often ways we can make adjustments, but we do need to keep our wits about us as we do that. And fortunately, that was an option in this case. But I'm always surprised the more I draw how many options there are to correct things that aren't quite, in retrospect, the way we would have liked them to be. So it gets a bit murky under here, and I start to lose track a little bit as to exactly what I'm doing. But sometimes the easiest way around that in our drawing is to think, well, if it's ambiguous in life, I'm better off perhaps leaving it a bit ambiguous in my drawing and doing less rather than more. And now, as I usually do, as I get towards the edges of my drawings, I often become even looser in my line work. I'm thinking the speed that you're watching this is probably half as fast again to my actual drawing speed. I know I did draw this very quickly and I was consciously trying to draw it fast. I certainly remember that, but this is just a little bit too manic to be or relentlessly manic to be actual speed. So now we move into this final place of detail. This tower, the beautiful architectural detail that used to be added just to look beautiful, that I miss so much in so much of modern architecture. While I do like a lot of elements of much modern architecture, I love the Shard in London. I just think that's beautiful. I like the big tower at Barangaroo in Sydney, but there is so much of modern architecture that just looks very boxy and seems to have no imagination at all. So this is where the pace picks up, because I have so many points of reference to align things for, and if I'm drawing on location, it is exactly the same. This is where going slow at the start and working really hard to draw accurately in proportion pays off. Virtually everything I do now, I can compare its placement with things I've already drawn. Now we have this large tree on the left, and just as the cars for me were a problem, trees, from what I observe in drawings, are often a problem. Trees, well, foliage of all types, plants, trees, grass, is often a problem in streetscapes that I look at, where the architecture is and most of the other elements is actually well handled, and it's quite clear that the person who drew it doesn't have the same confidence or experience or technical skill in drawing trees, which is always a shame, because in some ways our drawing will always be pulled down to the level of the weakest element, just as if someone's singing a song in a performance. If we're not confident that they're going to be able to hit all the notes accurately, even if they hit most of them very accurately, it does create a certain uncertainty, a certain tenseness in enjoying the overall song. And I think there's a visual arts equivalent when there are elements, even if they're just minor and scattered throughout, that aren't quite right. Visually, it creates an uncertainty, a lack of confidence in the overall. It becomes this distraction from all the parts that are working well. I think I might have banged the table with my knee then. Sorry about that. But for me, I must admit, drawing with trees was never a problem, because before I started drawing, I actually painted trees in oils for 10 years before. So that gave me plenty of opportunity for observing trees and working through a lot of the issues of representing them. I mean, obviously with a pen it was different to a brush, and with black and white it was different to using colour as well as value. But I was surprised at what a head start having painted them, how much advantage there was for me when I began to draw them. And trees are also a great example of a subject that we can work on just as a one-off. We can, in a couple of minutes, try and sketch the sort of tree, the sort of way, at the sort of size we would be sketching a tree in a streetscape. And that, I think, is a really helpful way to improve our overall drawing without having to go through all the time of drawing the whole drawing. I mean, this took me, well, if this is 35 minutes is basically 2/3 time, then this, say, took me 45 minutes to do in real time. But I could do 10 trees, 10 practice trees, if trees were a weakness, in that time, and have the benefit as if I'd drawn 10 of these, which clearly would have taken a lot more time. So just drawing the weak elements. I worked on my crowds, on my people all drawn in a suitable way for a streetscape in the same way. Now, it was partly this hatching I'm doing now for the shadow of the tree on the station entrance that made me think there's just too many lines. I should have just actually not put that shadow in. I don't think it would have been as clear from in the drawing that it was missing. It's actually not the shadow of the tree, it's the shadow of the building, I think. But I should have just left it off, and I think the clarity would have really helped the scene, and I don't think I would have had the problem I had looking at it quite the same way. But by now, as I put that hatching on, I thought, no, look, it's too messy, it's too much ink. I'm going to use my sketch markers and see if I can't make it feel a little less visually tangled up and all over the place. So a few more things. Now, again, this is where it's tempting to leave the cars looking like this. But cars, while they sometimes are reflecting sunlight off them and we don't see into them, that's probably not as common as we would like it to be. And in any given scene, because the cars are turned at different directions often, in some cars there may be a bouncing reflection off the front and we can't see in, but in others we'll be able to see right through to out the back window. So again, we need to work at finding marks that, while they don't necessarily add all the detail that we can see in a photo, it's always the problem with a photo, it captures more detail than we can draw. We do want to work at being able to get the feel of that detail in some way and to make the scale of it appropriate for the car. In other words, the size of the head for the gap behind the steering wheel. And when it comes to heads, whenever I'm drawing them, my rule of thumb is to always go smaller than I think, because you can always just add a little bit more hair to make a head look larger, but you can't make it smaller once it's there, not when you're drawing freehand in ink. But drawing freehand in ink, look, it is a great technique to develop for location sketching. It's why one of the two main reasons I began to draw freehand in ink, because I was planning to do a lot of street sketching in a trip to Europe that was cancelled in the end because of COVID, but sadly. But I didn't want to get bogged down with erasers and back and forth, because I had that experience in street sketching and I found it increasingly annoying. And I found, ironically, the better I became at drawing, the more demanding it felt within me to erase anything that wasn't right. I became more perfectionistic the better I got. So I decided that if I couldn't erase anything, then I couldn't keep throwing my drawing into reverse. I'd have to keep pushing forwards and just making the best of it and learning to make the best of it. And that's something I definitely learned. I learned that most of the things that we don't like when we do them in drawing can be either corrected, sometimes hidden completely, or sometimes we just have to leave them and realize at the end, it doesn't matter. Look at that line on that awning for the railway platform in the upper right. It looked so terrible when I did it, and now I hardly don't even notice it. It's only that I was trying to remember to look at it again later in the drawing that I'm even thinking of it. When it comes to people, and we're adding value, lights and darks, I like to keep it high contrast. Basically, everyone is going to have a light and or a dark part of their wardrobe. But what I make it doesn't usually bear reference to the photo or to what I see in front of me. It's what will help the figures stand out well from their background and from each other. Again, this is where we need to remember we are the artists and we need to make the best choice for our drawing. We can disregard the photo at this point. No one normally is going to be looking at the photo and comparing the photo with what I've drawn. Although that's not the case for almost every drawing I do these days, it is the case for most of us most of the time. So that's getting very close to the end. A few more lines now to sort of indicate the reflected shiny light on the cars, along the car bodies, the very characteristic effect that's created by the light hitting the Duco, the long, shiny, smooth panels, and the way that interacts with other lights and the actual colour of the car as well. Very, very characteristic effect on cars. So we want to work it in some simplified way, being able to see it and transfer it from a two-dimensional form, if we're looking at a photo, to our drawing, or if we're looking at it in life, from a three-dimensional form into a two-dimensional form in our drawing. But either way, it's certainly well worth working at. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting, this video helpful, if you do location sketching, but even if you simply enjoy drawing from photos, streets do present a very particular set of challenges, and particularly at that ground level section. But if we're systematic in our thinking, and if we seek to develop systems then when we draw based on our thinking, we find that we can develop ways that will end up creating the finished drawings with whatever effects we particularly want to capture in what we draw. It's always about being free in the end to create the result that we're after. So please hit that like button, and why not have a go drawing some streetscapes yourself. I'll see you next video. Bye.